We're excited to have three great speakers joining us today from Greenbacker Capital. We have Bailey Plummer, Principal Investments, Shannon Scarborough, Sustainability Program Manager, and Jeff Sheridan, Business Development. Thank you all for joining us. And with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. First of all, just want to say welcome and thank you. Appreciate everybody's time joining us today to talk about investing to combat climate change in the way that we execute that at Greenbacker Capital. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm joined with my colleagues, Bailey Plummer, who works on our investment side, and Shannon Scarborough, who runs sustainability efforts at our organization. We, as an organization, Greenbacker Capital, are an asset manager focused exclusively on climate and climate solutions. While we think that there's a lot of opportunities and there's no one right approach to tackle the huge issue that is climate change, we do think that in addition to public markets, that investing directly into assets and opportunities that directly affect and reduce carbon footprint is important as part of the solution. And so today we're going to talk about how we do that here at Greenbacker. We are an organization that started in 2011, so we've been doing this for quite a long while. We have assets under management just maybe over $3 billion in assets. We own projects, renewable projects, and have investments in companies focused on renewables all over the country. To date, we have over 450 assets across more than 35 states. And so we really understand the history of where this market has been. We understand the different types of technologies, different implementations of them across different geographies within the United States. And so today, Bailey's going to talk to you about how we invest and how we maximize opportunities for return, both financial return as well as environmental. And then Shannon's going to talk to you about, once we have invested, how we can be the best stewards of the land that our assets sit on, or the best participants in the communities that we participate in and or invest in. So without further ado, Bailey, I'll throw it over to you and appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the intro. So I really wanted to start the conversation today talking about kind of our differentiated approach, how we go into assets, how we think about them, and what our goals are when we start working through transactions and adding assets to our portfolio. So we are really a long-term owner-operator of all of our assets. Being an evergreen fund, we take a look at these assets and try to figure out how do we maximize not only how much energy these assets are producing, but how long we can keep them running for and how we can maximize the returns on these assets. So that approach really leads us into a very thoughtful and strategic diligence phase where we work with our team of experts internally to really figure out how to maximize these assets. Again, try to get them out to their 30 to 40 year life. These assets can go for that long. And so trying to continue to maximize those opportunities and be the long-term operator and owner of those assets is really our main focus. So we have a team internally of about 50 plus technical asset managers, which is pretty unique for a fund the way Greenbacker is set up. We really wanted to bring in a group of experts who can help us make sure that the assets that we're looking at and the assets that we ultimately bring into our portfolio are optimized. Again, not only financially, but truly in how they actually run and operate. We're trying to be a great steward to our investors as well as to the grid, being that we're, basically a small scale utility provider, given that we do have over 450 projects across the United States. We want to make sure that we're giving renewables a great leg up. We're making them, a really reliable resource for the entire utility grid. And we're, again, maximizing the value for our investors. So as part of our investment process, we work with our technical due diligence team, which is an internal team who really focuses on the engineering aspects of the asset. So they review what our production profiles look like, what our operating life opportunities are for these assets, right? So your design cycle helps you determine how long these assets should operate for. So they're making sure that we're looking at those appropriately. They're making sure we're considering, is there any tree shading on our solar sites? Is there any environmental hazards on our wind projects that we should be aware of? And really giving us an in-depth review of what we can expect to produce from these projects. We also have an internal construction and procurement team who focuses on how can we procure the best equipment that's available on the market to make the most efficient projects that produce the highest level of production and energy output, as well as, who can we work with to build these projects, who are experts who have been doing this for a long time and who have a great reputation for building assets that last the full life that they're supposed to last for. We also have an internal asset management and operations team. We lean on them very heavily during our entire diligence process to make sure we understand what the operating budget of these assets are. I would say Greenbacker typically has a pretty fulsome operating budget because we want to make sure that these assets, if they do go down, come back online quickly. If they have major equipment failures, we have a budget set aside for that to make sure that we can replace that equipment with the latest and greatest and integrate it well into the system. So we spend a decent amount of time internally working with these experts to make sure that we're not only buying renewable energy assets that are a sustainable investment, but that these investments last the full 30 to 40 year life that they have the opportunity to last for. This is really a differentiator for us, especially being a fund, because a lot of funds have an exit position from 3 to 7 years where they're looking to flip these assets, get out of them, and send them on to the next owner. We don't have that strategy. We're an evergreen fund, so we're very focused on the long-term view here. It differentiates us when we go to the market and try to source new potential assets to bring into our portfolio. So we're typically working with developers who have structured an offtake agreement, let's say with a major corporate or a utility. And again, we're across 35 states at this point. So, we have a lot of major contract counterparties that are very material to the projects and to Greenbacker as a fund. But these developers, before we stepped in and ultimately became the long-term owner operator of these assets, had a relationship that could have started, 3 to 5 or 7 years before we stepped in as the long-term owner operator. And so we want to make sure that we maintain very good relationships with those contract counterparties. It's really important to the developer to know that they're going to sell it to one party who's going to hold on to these assets and who has the long-term perspective of how important it is to keep these projects operating at their full capacity during their full useful life. So we end up having a lot of deals that come sourced from these developer partners because they like that we're in these assets for a long time. They like that we're willing to have a robust operating budget and keep the projects producing at the highest level possible, because that's ultimately going to be a great outcome for them as a developer and as they continue their relationships with those contract counterparties. So we're always trying to kind of put our foot in that position and stake a claim in how, we do care about how these assets produce over the long term. And that we're willing to kind of put our money where our mouth is in terms of hiring people internally who are experts and who can guide, the investments team like myself into exactly what we need to budget to make sure that these assets look right. And then working with our technical due diligence team to make sure that our production assumptions are, above market. I'm going to stay there for the 30 to 40 years. We work very closely with these developers for years and try to do as many repeat transactions as we can. So again, these relationships are crucial for us. It differentiates us in the market and is, really a way that we're thinking we can make the largest impact on the energy transition. We want to make sure that the entire market understands that renewables are a reliable resource and can function for a long time. And so we're here to kind of help push that message forward as we continue to transition away from traditional energy sources and towards the renewable space. We are obviously going to continue to participate in what that energy transition is, including battery storage, energy efficiency, EV charging, mobility, to make sure that renewables continue to be a reliable resource as, again, we transition away from traditional energy sources and towards renewables. Of course, we know that solar produces the most at night during the day, and the most during the summer, and wind produces the most at night and the most during the winter. So by pairing a portfolio of both solar and wind, you get a very steady production curve that's only further solidified and reliable when you add battery storage to it as well. So that's a major focus of ours. And again, we want to be part of this energy transition. We want to make renewables a reliable resource across the grid. And that's really where our goals are. I did want to also talk about the renewable energy, like current finance market. I think it's important to address kind of what's being talked about on the market in terms of interest rates and equipment cost increases. And so I thought I'd mention a Wall Street Journal article that came out a few weeks ago that kind of put a bad light on what the Wall Street Journal said was going to be a financial hurdle for the renewable energy space. And I really found that to be so interesting. It talked to how the increase in interest rates and the increase in cost of equipment really is going to make financing renewable energy projects very difficult. And I just found it to be so interesting because that's the opposite of the experience we're having at Greenbacker. We put both debt and tax equity on all of our projects. So we have tons of financing relationships. We have 450 assets that we put financing on. And so we're very, very involved in the financing of these projects as well. It's actually one of the reasons that developers, want to work with us. They don't want to have to do the financing part because it's onerous and time consuming. So they look to us to kind of, get that financing done, finish that hurdle, and therefore get them the best project in terms of cost of capital. So what I was reading in this Wall Street Journal article is that because of the increased cost of equipment and increase in interest rates, financing renewable energy projects was going to be very difficult. And that's not what we're seeing. Obviously, the entire world is more expensive. Inflation has gone up materially over the last 2 years. Everything across the market is more expensive. I'm sure everyone's noticed their energy bills have gone up. Mine have as well. But we're really seeing in the renewable space that our contracts are responding to that, right? So our contracts for energy have gone up materially over the last 2 years, which help us compensate for increase in interest rates, increase in equipment costs. And we really don't believe that the energy prices are going to go back down to the 2020 and 2021 rates where they were. Energy prices were so low at that point. I mean, no one was leaving their house, shops, restaurants, bars, all closed. So energy consumption was at an all-time low. But that's just not our long-term future. Everyone, is excited to be back out of their house and back out in the world. And so we truly believe that where energy prices are today is the new kind of base level, and we're going to continue to increase going forward. And we do believe that our contracts are going to take that into account and going to compensate us for that increased price of electricity. That not only helps us with the increased cost of equipment, but also absorbs some of the increase in interest rates. I think generally energy assets like renewable energy have sticky returns. So even when post-COVID interest rates dropped to near zero, we didn't change our return threshold very materially because, again, we think energy assets are pretty sticky and ultimately kind of fall over the long-term return targets that have always been available to energy assets. So it's the same with interest rates going up. We haven't increased our return targets because we don't believe in the long term that they're going to settle at this higher interest rate moment. We believe they're going to go back to the long-term rates of about 3.5 and stay there. So we don't want to be reactive in our return targets based on a short-term interest rate spike. So again, a lot of this is being absorbed not only from energy prices increasing on our contracts, but also, our return targets staying the same, being compensated for by our increased energy prices in our contracts. And we've had plenty of access to capital on both the debt and the tax equity side to lower our cost of capital on these projects, bring in efficient financing, and therefore offer maximized returns for our investors, as well as maximized outcomes for our developer partners. So again, it was a really interesting article, but I really did not see how that logic kind of led them to believe that financing in the renewable space was going to be difficult. The article even mentioned the IRA, but didn't totally talk about the benefit of what the IRA is going to do for the renewable space. And the IRA has now given us solid tax credits for the next 10 years. 10 years is a long trajectory of visibility into these tax credits, into financing, and is really going to continue to bolster and expand the renewable space pretty materially. This is probably the largest, energy bill we're going to see in the renewable space in the near term here, and we're very excited about the outcome, and are continuing to wait for guidance from the IRS to understand exactly how the IRA is going to play out. But the IRA is going to give us access to these tax credits for 10 years. So being a fund like Greenbacker, who has placed tax credits since 2011, we have great relationships with tax equity providers that will continue to move forward, that will continue to need these tax credits to offset their tax liability. And given the increase in the tax credits, we're going to be able to place even more tax equity on each of these projects. Before the IRA came out, we were, rolling down the initial ITC. It was going from, it was at 30% and we were down to 22%. So coming back up and being able to get to 30, 40, 50, 60% with the IRA just unlocks an entire new level of capital, a new goal in terms of valuing these assets, and the opportunity to just continue to expand the renewables market. We're obviously waiting for guidance, but, see a huge benefit to Greenbacker being in the fact that we have placed tax equity in the past. Generally, tax equity is a barrier to entry in the renewables market. It's niche, it's complicated, and it's very much relationship based. So having those tax equity relationship and partners really allow us to maximize what we can put in terms of the capital stack on these projects. I do think there's going to be a lot of new market entrants from the developer side to the purchaser side to, additional funds coming in, maybe more international players. But again, we think Greenbacker is in a place where we can absolutely maximize the value of the IRA through these tax credits at the most efficient level. There's the transferability of credits, which is not nearly as valuable as placing a tax equity partnership. It definitely is easier to source that, and it's easier to transfer it to someone and just get the cash. But you're not going to maximize the amount of value from the tax credits available. They're going for about 90 cents on the dollar right now, and we kind of continue to expect it to stay below, the dollar threshold on those transferable tax credits. Where with a tax equity partnership, there's an opportunity to get more than the tax credits are worth based on the, as I said, complicated and intricate structuring that goes into tax equity. So we're really excited about that. I think, we've gotten guidance over the last few months. It's going to continue to come out, and we're well positioned to take advantage of that. For example, we're working on one of our projects that's actually going to take advantage of a solar ITC. And we were able to work with a tax equity partner, get them comfortable that this is a solar ITC deal, start structuring it while we wait for guidance to come out. And because we have those relationships, we were able to position ourselves well there. And then, I did also want to kind of talk about another transaction at Greenbacker that was unique and kind of shows that we're always paying attention to not only how do we operate these projects for their full life, but what other value can you get from the land on these projects? I think it's underestimated how much land it takes to have renewables. And we always want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the land we do occupy, not only from producing sustainable energy, but also from being able to use that land for multiple uses. So back in 2021, we actually transacted on two projects up in Massachusetts, Black Cat and Ring Road, that actually are sited on cranberry bogs. And contrary to what the ocean spray commercials might make you think, these cranberry bog projects are only in water for about 6 weeks a year, but they do flood the sites, which is such an interesting, process of how do you put solar on sites that get flooded once a year for about 6 weeks. So we did a ton of, engineering and environmental work to figure out how do we build these sites so that we can not only produce solar on them, but continue to have active cranberry bogs. So by working with the local farmers there, by working with third-party engineers and really designing a system that gave you that dual use added process on this site, we're not only producing renewable energy, but we're also farming cranberries and have relationships with the farmers that last the life of the project. So that, it was really a way for us to capture additional value because these projects are in the Massachusetts SMART program. In the Massachusetts SMART program, you actually get an agricultural adder that allows you to get additional value and revenue based on using dual use on your land. So that added value not only from the project standpoint, but to the long-term operations. And then we also are able to use this land for more than one purpose, which I think is what we need to focus on in the renewable space generally. And that project is going to come online in 2024. It's currently under construction, and we're really excited to see it up and operating. And we'll make sure to take videos when it floods once a year. But I'll kind of end it with that and really appreciate everyone's time. I think, we're trying to make a difference not only on the financial side and try to maximize returns for our investors, but also on the impact investing side. We want to make sure we're being good stewards for the projects we own and the land that we operate them on.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bailey. I think just at the outset, I just wanted to make sure for those who are more 101 on the subject to indicate two things. One, that the IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which, as Bailey mentioned, was a monumental energy bill that passed. And then two, that the ITC, if you didn't already gather, that is the investment tax credit, the counterparty to that being the production tax credit. I think, to summarize, really appreciate all that info, Bailey. Obviously this is a really complex market, and as you mentioned, really complex transactions. Our belief is that for both institutional and individual investors, that it's incredibly important that investors have a partner that really knows today's market, has the history of how we got here, but also is looking towards what's coming next, because it is quite a dynamic market, and it's certain to change into the future. And that we at Greenbacker have established ourselves not only with great folks like Bailey to deploy capital into these assets, but with technical folks that can actually make sure that these physical assets that'll be in a field somewhere for 30 or 40 years are maintained very well, because two sites out there are not equal. Those who maintain them better are going to get better returns, both financial and environmentally. And now to talk a little bit about how we do that and make sure that we are the best stewards of the land and the assets that we have, we'd love to pass it over to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Jeff and Bailey, for that introduction. And as Bailey mentioned, we at Greenbacker own and operate these projects for their lifetime. We operate in upwards of 35 states across the US. And so not only, are we stewards of the technical asset, of course, but that sits on top of the biological asset, which is the land. And really, I think at a high level, because this is so regionally specific, every site is special, you could say. At a high level, what we're looking to do is to steward the land by enhancing ecosystem services, which is essentially just, benefits provided to us through healthy ecosystems. And so that can look like, pollination for adjacent agricultural lands. It can look like providing food or habitat for crops that are dependent on pollinator species. It can look like improving water quality through building healthy soils and stabilizing soils. And at the same time, we can also reduce our operations and maintenance costs over the lifetime of the project. And so typically, historically, you've seen solar development where, a turf grass is laid down. It's intended to establish quickly so the site can stabilize. It grows fast. We have to mow it often. And this gets rather expensive. Could be anywhere between, hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars over the lifetime of the project just to mow it so it doesn't shade the panels. And so if we can kind of take that approach and deploy it regionally across our fleet, which is what we're doing strategically, that looks very different. So, cranberry bogs in Massachusetts, of course, aren't going to work out in California. And that's not going to also, be the same as what we're deploying in Vermont. And so in many ways, we are either implementing typically native vegetation. So that can look like native prairie habitat, pollinator-friendly habitat. We can also implement rotational sheep grazing to build soil health. So that would be in lieu of mechanical mowing, which there are a host of, other benefits to deploying sheep on site. It reduces fire risk. It promotes greater diversity in species on the site, which again, a more resilient ecosystem, more diversity in species is beneficial to us as the owners, because it's going to help with weed suppression. It's going to help with reduced runoff or erosion potential. And so, we've kind of deployed this strategically in pockets across our fleet in different ways. And I think just to take a step back, the context for renewable energy solar deployment specifically in the US and what we will see in the coming years to meet our renewable energy goals as a nation is somewhere between 10 and 15 million acres of land. And, that may not be a lot of land if you think about the total land of the US, but solar is typically sited on land that is prime agricultural land, flat, sunny, fertile, open expanses. Farmland and solar, they both need that. And so at a local level, historically, there's the idea that solar might be taking farmland out of production. And when in actuality, what we can deploy is either a dual use or what's called agrivoltaics, which is just a fancy word for agriculture and photovoltaics happening on the same parcel of land. And so there's actually a host of benefits to the farmer and to us as the owner operator and to the community when we can kind of collaborate and combine those efforts. And so, we're able to keep farmland in production, right? So we have in the US right now, we have an aging farming population. We have a sort of loss of land use in farmland production that is vulnerable to development. It's vulnerable to fragmentation. And this is kind of a way that we're able to, keep farming economically viable for these farmers. So they'll receive lease payments for the lifetime of the project on their land. They're still able to farm their land. Or if they're not, if we're not implementing crops under the panels and we're able to establish a native perennial vegetative cover, we're actually rejuvenating the soil. And over the course of 30 to 40 years, that soil is going to be left, able to be farmed in a way that may even be better than it was when we found it. And there's a lot of, interesting other synergies that are being found across the US and in other parts of the world as well, where you have, cooler microclimates under the panels when you have a perennial vegetative cover, and that can contribute to greater production in energy. So, we found in arid regions in the US that you may need less water to yield the same amount of crop on a piece of land when you have the panels shading it. It also reduces heat stress for livestock farmers under the panels as well. And so, on a number of our sites across the US, we really try to, and I coordinate with researchers from National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Argonne National Laboratory specifically. There is a, sort of the, initial study that targets dual use called the Innovative Site Preparation and Impact Reductions on the Environment. And we have a number of sites that are hosts for this study. So we allow access to the site. we collaborate and coordinate, providing data to these researchers, and I work with them as well to, give the industry perspective on what hurdles and obstacles, I'm seeking to, essentially understand, and how can we deploy this essentially. And so the goal of these studies are really to enhance our understandings of the benefits of pollinator-friendly solar on local agricultural yields, and identify specific impacts of low-impact solar development on soil quality, carbon storage, stormwater management, microclimate conditions, as I mentioned, and solar efficiencies. And actually, so in Michigan, we have a 19 megawatt DC site. It's about 90 acres, where we established native prairie habitat on this site. And that right now is looking at, we have researchers from the Energy Resources Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago, evaluating the economic, ecological, and performance impacts of co-located pollinator planting, specifically at large-scale solar sites. And this study, which was kind of born out of the findings from the INSPIRE study I mentioned, the goal really is to help develop guidance and decision-making tools for someone like me to roll out pollinator habitat in a way that is more informed. And, we're able to say, yes, we feel confident in by year 7 or year 10, we will start seeing reduced maintenance events, which contributes, of course, is great because it's a cost savings. But we're also able to, steward the land. I think it's kind of an obvious win-win. It just takes a little bit more coordination up front. It's not as easy as just throwing down the cheapest, quickest seed that will grow. But, it just makes sense, essentially. And so I sit on an industry advisory group with these researchers to kind of provide them feedback and essentially advise the research, direction from an industry perspective. And, we will continue to do that on research other than just pollinator-friendly solar. Agrivoltaics is really a nascent industry right now in the US, but it's picking up a lot of speed. And I'm sure that there will be studies done on these cranberry bog sites. So I'm definitely excited to see those in action. Lastly, we're looking at, essentially when you think about vegetation, you're really talking about soil health. And we have a really great opportunity, I would say, and responsibility to steward that soil. And, with NREL as an example, they're working to create a national soil carbon baseline. And so we provide them, again, access to our site, data about the land use of our site. And, we kind of help work in coordination with them to help us understand how we can actually not only have good intentions, but, have a positive impact on these sites. And again, I think the cost benefit analysis is key here, because that is really the way that I can scale this at Greenbacker and across the industry. And, I'm excited to see the different ways that we can and will deploy agrivoltaics across our fleet. I think it's really just a win-win for everybody. And again, it just takes a lot of stakeholder engagement, talking with the landowner. I think that's really key. And understanding what their needs are and how we can, compromise and farm under a solar facility. It's pretty great. So I'll stop there.
It is. And obviously there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity given the land available. And so, from my standpoint, just really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Shannon. I want to invite everybody listening and attending also to take a look at our site, because there's a tremendous amount of additional information on our insights, which is under resources, insights at greenbackercapital.com, both from an investment standpoint. So here showing the resiliency of infrastructure, the outlook for the year, but then specifically to many of the things that Shannon talked about. Page 2 here shows some of our views on agrivoltaics. And so we love this asset class because it's resilient, for the focus on non-correlation and diversification, stability of value. But it's not possible without the type of team that we've built. So once again, appreciate everybody's time, and look forward to conversations going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for your insights, and thank you to our audience for joining us on this session.